While the First World War was started in Europe with the assassination of an Austrian archduke, the seeds of British involvement actually began in 1839. As the independence of Belgium took shape, the majority of global powers of the time attempted to diplomatically keep the balance of power in Europe by making the new nation neutral, thus in no nation's sphere of influence. As the decades passed on, the European balance of power was always shifting, but Belgium maintained its neutrality as part of a condition of her independence. Under King Leopold, the same Belgian nation in 1870 and 1880s famously sent explorers and expeditions to claim large swathes of the African Congo. Once again, this shifted the balance of power in Europe. A minor state of 30,000 kilometers now controlled a colony of millions of kilometers. Various nations had already claimed the area, just hadn't exercised any occupation of the overseas possession. Not to be outdone by the upstart neighbor, Bismarck, Chancellor of the German Empire, hosted the Berlin Conference in 1884. The consequence of this conference was the Berlin Act of 1885. It was agreed that colonies on the east coast of Africa were to remain neutral in times of European conflict. These agreements were still being upheld in 1914 when the German Empire asked for neutral Belgium to give the German military access in order to invade the French Republic on the 3rd of August 1914. Refusing military access to the German Empire in an effort to remain neutral, German forces invaded neutral Belgium anyways. On the 3rd of August, the Belgian government appealed to the British Empire to intervene against the invading German forces. In keeping with the Treaty of 1839, Britain asked for the German army to vacate Belgian lands. Refusing so, on the 4th of August, Britain declared war on Germany. On the 5th of August, various meetings were held with the pretext of protecting British shipping around the globe to the island nation. Plans were made to invade Germany's colonial possessions. On the same day, in East Africa, many hoped their pieces of paper would yet deter conflict from spreading to their colonies, while others made moves. 57-year-old Governor Belfield of British East Africa had a military force of around 2,400 King's African Rifles, officers, and askaris, plus local commission police askaris. These troops had a military mission of security, a mixed duty of keeping the locals from engaging in violence, and anti-theft patrols. A single company of the King's African Rifles was stationed in Nairobi, carried out these duties, but as well as carried out ceremonial details. Governor Belfield hadn't increased the colony's military might since coming in 1912, but his tenure up to that point hadn't really warranted it. He had wanted to review the colony's military capabilities in July 1914, but later changed his mind when the commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion King's African Rifles was absent on leave. On the 5th of August, Governor Belfield declared the colony under martial law. Even after learning the British government was planning to invade German East Africa, he encouraged it, but busied himself with other affairs, organizing the hundreds of settlers flooding into Nairobi to enlist in the conflict were left to their own devices. The British military commanding officer at the outbreak of conflict was Lieutenant Colonel Ward of the 4th Battalion King's African Rifles. Anticipating conflict with Germany, he had made a military appreciation of the colony's defenses and was able to signify the importance of the Ugandan Railroad that stretched across British East Africa and Uganda. On the outbreak of war, he was found to be the highest-ranking officer in both Uganda and British East Africa's colonies. Assuming command on the 5th of August, he immediately redeployed troops from across the colonies to concentrate on Nairobi and build an improvised headquarters staff, stripping the colony of the regular troops to redeploy them to vital areas along the railroad. He replaced them with newly raised units popping up to internal security and drilling. He placed emphasis on defense in depth and the importance of protecting the Ugandan Railroad. Opposite Governor Belfield, German Governor Schnee. Schnee had been active in Germany's colonial politics for quite some time, before taking up the governorship of German East Africa in 1912. He oversaw the colony's economics, which had been operating at a deficit. While the colony was vast, it was importing around 2.5 million pounds sterling, while only exporting 1.7 million pounds sterling worth of goods. Germany accounted for consuming 1 million pounds sterling worth of exports. The two main goods imported were clothing and rice, costing the colony around £1 million. Governor Schnee had a similar security force to that of British East Africa, around 2,700 men made up of German officers and African askaris in the German Schutztruppe. He hadn't been taking actions to increase this force or build up any coastal defenses, instead hoping the British would adhere to the Berlin Act of 1885. In the opening days of war, he relegated internal military matters to his military right-hand man, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. His position of wanting to adhere to the Berlin Act and be a loyal German officer were sometimes at odds. Take the 8th of August 1914, for example. The capital of German East Africa was Dar-es-salaam, meaning haven of peace. The capital had had her harbor entrance obstructed to ocean access with German scuttled vessels, thus blocking any navy using the harbor to make war. That didn't stop the British from shelling the city's rail station and wireless radio mast by the HMS Astraea. The shelling was reported to have done minimal damage, but Governor Schnee ordered the wireless radio mast destroyed and negotiated with the British vessel's captain, Captain Sykes. The negotiations asked the Germans to refrain from any hostile acts, but after the British left, Governor Schnee had the radio mast reassembled, but disguised it this time as a tropical palm tree in order to report the situation to Berlin. If Governor Schnee was mired with following international law, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck was mired with a warrior's heart. Initially, he had been offered the command of German Cameroon, but turned down the post. Having fought several uprisings in China and Southwest Africa, and later serving in various German army regimental staffs, Vorbeck applied for a position in the German Colonial Command after a career spanning 24 years prior to 1914. In January 1914, he finally takes command of the German East African Schutztruppe after arriving in Dar-es-salaam. He immediately took to touring the country and vigorously inspecting all of his command posts. Impressed by all their doctrine and discipline, he immediately went on to refit his men with modern smokeless rifles as best he could. Also, he took the time to inspect various police units and European shooting clubs. He also had an occasion to interact with various local tribesmen. All of these would help him at the outbreak of war. After the events of August 8th, Vorbeck took a column of German askaris to repel a suspected British landing at Dar-es-salaam. Seeing the British vessels off the coast, he sent a German officer ahead. While the British had actually landed and then retired back, the news the German officers returned with was even more grave. The officer reported the British had landed and negotiated with Governor Schnee, had himself blown up the wireless radio mast. From that point forward, Vorbeck would make every attempt to exclude the governor from military planning, despite the governor ranking higher than Vorbeck.